I'm with Brian Goldner, head of exploration for Talon Metals. The symbol for Talon is TLO on the TSX. Good afternoon, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Robert.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on Goldfinger Capital. I think everybody wants to hear more from Talon these days after that, discovery at the Vault Zone. So a little bit of media recently. I saw you get some news coverage at the state fair there in Minnesota. So tell us about that, and why was Talon at the state fair?
Yeah, that was kind of fun. I've never been to the state fair for work before, but our vault drill hole was showcased at the DNR building at the state fair. Anybody who knows the state fair knows, like, the DNR building is kind of one of the central buildings. State fair has about 2 million people go through every year, and we were showcasing the new discovery, the Vault Zone, at the request of the DNR. The DNR has a really nice display. They've got a building where they talk about everything, natural resources related. So there's a pool with fish, like every single fish species that's in the state, but there's also a lot of mineral stuff there as well, because for natural resources, minerals, the Minnesota is pretty well endowed with natural resources. They have a fantastic resource called the drill core library. It's up in Hibbing, Minnesota. They've got 3 buildings packed with drill core. So whenever you drill a hole in the state of Minnesota, 1/4 of the length of that hole needs to be reserved for the state. And what they do is they store it in perpetuity at this library. That's a really handy library for geologists, because we can go look at, say, what Hannah Mining did in 1950s, or name a company, and as long as it's public, we can take a look and we can log it, we can sample it. It's basically, it's like you drilled the hole, but they've been keeping it. So it's a fantastic resource. I don't know many other places that have a drill core library that isn't just a pile of rotten boxes in a yard somewhere. So it's, anyway, they need to expand. So I think there's a bit of a push for just showing people, the use of the drill core library. And then, obviously we had the Vault discovery. So showcasing, some of the shiny drill core made for a really good kind of exhibit.
Very cool. Yeah. And you get some press for that, and maybe you get to teach people about the exploration process and sort of how mining works, and also why Tamarack is pretty cool. Tamarack is world class.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the credit goes to the state. The Tamarack discovery was really in the 70s when they flew the airborne mag survey over the entire state. That was paid for by the penny per pack cigarette tax. So it's this, I think there's this message in there of investment early on, like this penny per pack cigarette tax, produced the mag survey, which then identified anomalies. And then the state followed up with a shallow drilling program. They drilled a 10-foot hole through the overburden to identify what the magnetic anomaly was. That was in the 90s. And then that all became public. They wrote up a report with thin sections, geochemical analysis, the whole kit and caboodle. And then, Dean, who was on last time, saw that report and said, well, this looks prospective. And, here we are making discoveries. So, a little bit of investment early on, I think it really opens the door for mineral companies to say, great, look at this great data. Let's take a crack at it.
Yeah, that's very cool. A penny per pack cigarette tax made a world-class massive sulfide discovery 40 years later. Yeah, that's a cool story. So let's talk about the Midcontinent Rift and why this is such an an intriguing area to make new discoveries in 2025. Basically, in our last conversation with Dean, you guys both agreed the Midcontinent Rift is the place you want to be. It's the place that you want to explore. Let's expand upon that and what makes it so interesting and so attractive now.
Well, these big rift events only happen a few times over geologic history. It's like when the continents come together, like in Pangea. I think we talked last time. This is how the Earth deals with overheating in the mantle. When the continents come together, it insulates and everything gets hot. That sends up a mantle plume and it just rips it apart. But when you send up a mantle plume, you're sending up a really hot and really primitive magma. And that's the key for nickel exploration, is you need those hot primitive magmas that have not seen olivine crystallize yet, because olivine can take quite a bit of nickel. And once it's in olivine, you can never get it out. So it's just locked up in olivine forever. So if you can have one of those hot magmas interact with, say, country rock, or generate sulfide in some sort of way, that sulfide will scavenge out the metals like nickel. And in doing so, takes them away from the magma. And then olivine can crystallize and not take a lot of nickel away. That's a real special kind of rock that does that. And that's what, all of these kind of large igneous provinces have, Midcontinent Rift being one of them. The other thing with the Midcontinent Rift, I think it's, oddly, I think it's a little underexplored. And a big part of that has to do with just the way land has worked in the various states. So, Michigan, where we have, a pretty significant land package of about 450,000 acres, that was all private. So that was held by Henry Ford. Ford wanted to vertically integrate lumber and steel for the Model T. And that's why he bought all that land. It came with timber rights, it came with mineral rights, and Ford actually had their own exploration division. So they were drilling holes, they were looking for new iron mines. In the 1990s, Ford sold off that. And so the timber obviously went to a timber company, or the surface went to timber companies. The mineral rights went to Rio Tinto, and that's where Dean got involved, initially looking for zinc, but then finding, the nickel. So, you compare that history to, say, like Canada. In Michigan, everything was private, and they were looking for iron. They weren't really looking for nickel. But in Canada, everything, it's a different system, being crown land for the most of it. It gets picked up and dropped multiple times, and that's how people, I think, really kind of make discoveries, is looking at things with a new eye. But in Michigan, it's been like one company, well, two now, that have kind of looked at this area. So I think it's really, really prospective, just because it's, not many people have looked at it. Similar to on the Minnesota side. The only thing that, you have to combat with the Midcontinent Rift is as you go further south, because the rift goes from Lake Superior down to like Kansas, and then over to Michigan. But as you go further south, you have to deal with cover. And cover does become a problem. We just don't have the technology to see through that cover yet. I think it's coming, and we'll get there. But right now we need to stay, above essentially 400 or 500 meters of cover to effectively explore.
So in Kansas, the rift is like 2,000 or more meters deep.
I don't know about Kansas. I know it does get progressively deeper as you go to the south.
Nice. Just
because you have all the limestones and units that have been placed on top of it.
So yeah, it's way harder to explore when you're that deep, because even like a divulge zone, like, the discovery was about 700 or so meters depth. But you worked your way down there gradually. It wasn't like that was like a completely blind hole. You had made some shallower, discoveries in the 138 zone, and then you worked your way down there and use your super cool technology to see the anomaly, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think, nickel's hard. A big porphyry, you have some geophysical techniques that can help you see things at depth. Nickel, because the footprint can be so small, even though it's, the value can be amazing, it just doesn't give off a huge geophysical signature. So that's where we have really good success when we're close. When we're, say, 30, 40 meters away, we can see it with borehole EM, and that's our tool of choice. But, if you're going to look deep, that's where MT comes in and some of those other techniques. The way to explore for nickel is ensure you're in the right intrusion, that the intrusion can host high-grade, high-tenor sulfides, that it has dropped out sulfides. You can see that in the chemistry. And then, it's a game of progressive working down, just like what we did in the vault zone.
Very good. So I'd like to sort of transition talking about working with the federal government, receiving grants from the Pentagon or what have you. There's a few government agencies that you can apply for funding for exploration or even mining. And then we've had some investments, some private public investments announced, recently, including with rare earths. And I wonder if we'll see more. So this is not a very well covered area, and even people in the industry don't really understand how to apply for government grants or funding or loans or what have you. So what can you tell us about the process of applying for federal funds?
It's a unique process. It's something that I, hadn't been a part of earlier. It's rather difficult. You really get vetted in that process. We got lucky enough to get the $114 million grant from the Department of Energy for the North Dakota facility. So I got to be on a Zoom call with the President of the United States, Joe Biden, at the time. I get Christmas cards now, which is kind of fun, and I have a letter from him on the wall that says "Keep up the great work," among other things, which is pretty cool. I mean, that's one of those, like, as a geologist, I never would have expected or thought that would be my career path. On the Department of Defense side, of course, we have the $20.6 million grant, and that's for finding more nickel in America. It's basically understanding that when you look at where the nickel comes from, the vast majority comes from overseas. Indonesia, Philippines, a lot of that is Chinese controlled. Russia, of course, one of the top 5 producers. China is one of the top 5 producers, and then Canada. And Canada's been mining for, 140 years. So grades are decreasing, depth is increasing. Going to be tough to compete at some point. So when you look at the top 5, 4 of them are countries that the U.S. isn't always on the best of terms with. So the understanding that as nickel became a critical mineral, that we need to look at identifying additional resources, and that's where I think Talon had a big leg up, because we've done this. Our focus is speed, essentially. Good quality drilling, delineation, and then having people like Dean on the team, who's 40, 50 years of looking at nickel geology, that really helps expedite the process. So that was the grant that we applied for. We ended up getting it. That one is a 50-50 cost share of 51-49 cost share with the Department of Defense. And the whole point was to find more nickel in America. And when you look at what's come out of that, we found the Boulder Dash. We made the Boulder Dash discovery last September, which was about 12 months into the grant. We've done a lot of work at Tamarack, drilling up kind of the resource, and then a couple months ago made the vault discovery. So I think it's already paid dividends.
So you received a grant for exploration of around $20 million, but you've only received a portion of that. So how does it work when the government gives you a grant for a certain chunk of funds? Do you have to spend the money first and then apply for a reimbursement, or can you apply for the funds when you're about to spend the money?
No, so it's all kind of on the back end. You spend the money first. You have a signed agreement. Spend the money first, and then submit invoices, say, quarterly.
I see. Okay, so you're in the process of spending those funds, but you still got a ways to go.
Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about the vault zone a little bit, Brian. So there was a news release in early August. There's a lot to unpack in this news release, but the place I want to start is that you showed like 2 anomaly zones. I'll say one near hole 50, one near hole 63. I'm shortening those hole numbers because they're pretty long. Hole 63 looks better to me, and the zone around hole 63 looks like it's more vertically extensive. It might even be a little wider. It's unclear at this point, but that looks like a better spot to drill. Am I right in that assessment?
I think it's too early to tell. I mean, I would agree that based on those two zones, I would pick 563, but we will drill the other one. You know, it's hole 250, hitting 8 meters of high-grade massive sulfide, you know, and having an off-hole borehole anomaly is a nice combination. It's just when you stack it up against 35 meters, it doesn't really compare. But we have to remember that 250 was the best intercept that the project had ever had at that point, and then we happened to hit 250 or 563, and that blew it out of the water. So yeah, that's where the rigs are focused, is on 563 right now.
So the news release said 2 rigs on 2 drill pads, and basically you're drilling wedge holes from the original hole 250 and hole 563. So explain that to us a little bit and how that works.
Yeah, so wedge drilling is a really cost-effective way to drill deeper targets. So, you know, the massive sulfide we were hitting around that 700 meter mark, but it goes down, well, you know, gets close to 800. Or we want to push the holes deeper to ensure that we run geophysics down below and see if there's anything down there. So instead of drilling from surface and that hole taking, say, a month, what we can do is pull back to, say, 500 meters, 550, and set a wedge. So we'll cement up the previous hole because we can never go back into that once we set a wedge. Set a wedge, kick out of the hole, and then from that point on, we just drill a little stub, maybe 20 meters, and then our directional contractor will come on site and start steering that hole. So we've done a lot of this in the past, and it's really effective for nickel because, you know, you need to be really accurate with where your hole goes, which we're pretty good at from surface, but 800 meters is, you know, you want to be a little more accurate than what we can do from surface at that depth. So the way that we do this is we'll come out with a directional drill, which is basically just a core barrel that goes on the end, and then a contractor kind of runs it, builds the dog leg. And we'll do a first dog leg to target our second target. Once that dog leg is finished, we'll drill straight for a little bit, and then we'll do another dog leg to drill our first target. At that point, once that is on target, the drill comes out, the DEVI, or the directional part of the drill comes out, and we just drill straight, just normal. The benefit of that is because we've built in 2 corrections into this hole. Once we're done with the first hole, we'll pull back, and we'll put on a brand new drill bit and a stabilized core barrel and drill through the curve that the first one lined us up on. And that way we can hit 2 targets with the price of 1. So that's a really effective way of kind of using directional drilling. We have 2, like you said, we have 2 rigs set up right now. The only issue that we've had is, because I think this whole critical mineral thing is really ramping up work everywhere, we've only been able to secure a single operator for the directional drilling. So we only get directional drilling for 12 hours. So we need to be a little creative on how we manage that, but most of the directional drilling corrections are done. We're on, I think, the last one right now. And then once that's done, you've basically set the table for just drilling the tails at this point.
I see. So yeah, I'm hearing the same thing about drill crews and even drill rigs across the country. If you haven't reserved for the next few months, you might be out of a rig or a crew. It's getting pretty scarce out there, and obviously this is a specialized sector, a very small part of the economy in the US, and there's just not a lot of skilled labor that understand how to do this stuff or even want to do this kind of work. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I'm actually kind of worried that we're going to have a big, I'm not talking about with Talon, but maybe just across the sector, some lab backlogs as well. Just a lot of assays stuck in the backlog or the log jam at the assay lab. So that's very interesting about the wedging. So basically, you guys are all set now on both drill pads. You're almost done with the, you know, wedging, and you're ready to just go to your target areas. Can you give us any idea of sort of when you might expect to hit some of these targets that you're focused on, and when investors might see another update from Talon?
It's tough right now. We need to finish this correction and ensure that we can maintain accuracy. That's the only other thing with directional, is sometimes they deviate off and you have to go back in and nudge it back. But it's, you know, the nice thing is all the prep work has been done for these grids. It's we just need to drill out these tails. So I'd say another maybe a week and a half of the directional work, and then after that it's just drilling the tails. So, you know, give me 2 weeks after those to get some of these holes down.
I see. Okay. Let's talk about the process of drilling. So let's forget about the wedge holes. Let's just talk about, if you're drilling a hole from surface, you're shooting at a target that's down 400 meters. You drill the hole. How long does the hole take to drill? And then what's the process like when the drill core comes out? What happens next? How are you doing the process of logging it and sending it off to, you know, the assay lab? If you could just kind of work us through the entire process from the drilling to getting the assays back from the lab.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it all starts with a target. Once you have your target, you need to know what are the tolerances of your target. So if you're drilling an MT anomaly, you know, tolerance really isn't that big of a deal because those anomalies are quite large and a little nebulous, just, you know, by kind of design. An EM plate requires a bit more precision because it's a real, actually measuring something in the rock right there. So once we have that, the next thing we'll do is we'll plan the drill hole. And one of the things that I think we've been pretty successful with is kind of redoing how we plan the holes and what, you know, tools we use to drill holes straight. We take a lot of pride in our hit rate, which has gone up substantially. You know, historically, when you had a geophysical anomaly, you drill it, it was about 50-50 that it would turn into something. We've taken that up to about 95% now. And that's a function of both the geophysics, the improvements that we've made on the geophysics, but it's also a function of the improvements that we've made on the drilling. So understanding that, you know, we have 150 feet or 50 meters of glacial till sitting on top. And if you hit a boulder, you glance off and like the hole's lost. Like it just gets worse the deeper you go. So we've modeled up how to drill through that and essentially play the wind. We know the drill string is going to bend. It happens at a pretty normal rate. So we build that into how we plan the hole, and then, you know, let it run and watch it as it goes. And if we need to make any adjustments, we can. But in general, by doing that initial planning really well, we have some pretty good results. So once we drill the hole, we get the core out. So the core, or as we're drilling the hole, I suppose, the core gets delivered to the core shed every day. The geologists will do the quick log where they just pop the lids, say what the rock type is and say how much mineralization there is. That goes into that handy dandy calculator that I told you about last time where, you know, it estimates what the nickel is. So we know, you know, on day one, what we think the nickel grade is of those rocks. It then, core logging usually gets triaged. So, you know, if you have a really nice hole, you'll log that. Once it gets up on the core trays, we have to log from top down. You never want to skip the top because if there is a run block issue, then you have, like if the drillers, you know, miss a run block or something, then you have cascading error depths or depth problems. So we always have to start at the top, make sure everything's good. Everything is usually good. It's like once a year we find something like that, and we're always thankful that we start at the top. We do, you know, recovery. We drill in feet, but we work in meters, so we have to convert all the run blocks. And then general logging, you know, lithology, alteration, mineralization. And then depending on where the hole is, we might have to do detailed geotech as well. And that's where you're measuring every single fracture, every vein, every parameter around those features. We'll do density and a few other things, and then photos. We do photos wet, photos dry. So as you can imagine, for like a 500-meter hole, it takes a fair bit of time to do all this. Once the photos are done, we actually do sample tags as well, put the tags in to show where we're going to sample. Then the core gets cut. And we have our saw facilities on site, the core shed. So it just goes in the saw room, gets cut, comes back out, and then the geologist will bag up the portion of the core that's going for assay. And then that goes into a tote and gets sent up. I completely agree with you on the assay part. We're seeing a pretty significant lag on assays, I'll say. I just sent up a batch in July that they just started processing now. So it waited for 4 or 5 weeks on the loading dock. So I think before this summer, assays were probably 4 weeks. Now we're at 8 to 10 probably, unless you rush, but then you're paying double.
Yeah, that's interesting about the rush. So I've heard different things about rush assays. What does it take to do a rush assay? And I've even heard some people tell me that a rush costs 3 or 4 times as much.
I haven't seen 3. I've seen 2. I think it makes sense for certain things. If you have a smaller zone that you really want to get numbers for, that makes a lot of sense. But if you're sampling everything, the longer holes, it's tough to justify rushing that.
So a 500-meter hole, how much would the assays cost approximately for that entire core?
Well, you've got, so let's say if you sampled on 3-meter intervals, which would be kind of the base, you would have some at 1.5 meter intervals for anything that's mineralized. You're probably at 150 samples. And then you add, the QCs. We do blanks, which is a local material that doesn't have any sulfur, nickel, copper, any things that we're interested in as a test. We do duplicates, where we'll quarter the core and take a quarter from each and just confirm that they're running the same. And then we have matrix matched samples. So they're samples that are generated from Tamarack material, so you don't have any matrix problems when it goes to the laboratory. And those are the standards that we know what they're certified, right? We know how much nickel, how much copper, how much PGEs, how much cobalt. So, I mean, you could be on a per hole basis, it could be quite a bit, depending on what you send them for, because there's all sorts of different chemistry that you can run as well.
Oh, right. So I just gave you a very complicated question that there's no easy answer to.
I mean, it could be 50 to 80,000 bucks.
Wow. Okay. So rush, you're spending a lot of money on it.
Yeah, it's real money.
Yeah.
You got to really think hard.
Yeah, do I really want this back so fast? Because the worst thing would be to pay an extra 50 grand and then not get the results you were thinking you were going to get.
Yeah.
Okay, so final question. I kind of want to go back to Tamarack and the vault zone. So with this discovery, which by the way was very well named by Talon, I think the vault zone is perfect. Does it make you rethink the whole project? Like if you think back to where you guys were in September 2024 versus where you are now, are you rethinking the scale of this? Are you rethinking the model? Are you rethinking everything?
Yeah, pretty much. Just back to the assays, I was off on the assays. We're looking at like 20,000 bucks for assays.
Oh, okay.
That's better. Just had to run that quick.
Okay.
Wasn't sitting right. Yeah, I think this is a really good opportunity to rethink everything. It's, as you saw in that press release, one of the things that we did is there was always this assumption that Tamarack runs north-south, and therefore our MT anomaly or MT panels we run them east-west. Because you always want to run your MT perpendicular to the way that your intrusion is striking. But it opened up the question of, what if it doesn't? And we already had the data. So it was just reprocessing in a different orientation. And that's when we started to see things pop out. Even the first line that we got back, it was like, oh, okay, we need to actually think about this. And that's when one of those anomalies that are in that press release popped out as, it looks gorgeous. So yeah, it's caused us to rethink a lot of things. One of the things that we are, I think, struggling with a little bit is why is there so much copper and nickel at the same time? If it was fractionation, I would have expected you to have a copper-rich sulfide and a nickel-rich sulfide. And we see that at Tamarack. When you get underneath, you have veins that, it's a chalcopyrite, pure chalcopyrite vein, and then you have a pure pentlandite vein. That makes a lot of sense. But, 563, we didn't really see that. They were blended together, but they also had the high PGEs and some of these other hallmarks. We are definitely rethinking everything. And this is one of the things I'm a big fan of, is start with the stupid ideas. Don't try and outsmart yourself. Just really come at it with dumb ideas and prove them wrong. And oftentimes when you do that, you'll find that maybe that dumb idea isn't actually all that dumb. And it opens up a whole new avenue of thinking that we hadn't been going down that route. So that's kind of what we're doing right now from a point of like, where could those sulfides come from? Are they actually related to the Tamarack massive sulfides, or are they coming from some other place?
Very interesting. Yeah. So I was kind of on the right path there with the whole idea of rethinking everything, because this is so different and so extraordinary. One more follow-up question. So with the wedge hole, so for example, with hole 50, you said you're drilling one wedge hole from that. Could it be that wedge hole that you drill off of 250 will lead to more, wedge holes, or will you drill a new hole from surface?
No, you can Christmas tree these things, where you can have, like, I don't know, I think our highest is 6 holes out of a parent hole. With wedging, you always have to go up. With directional drilling, you always have to go down. And what I mean by that is, when you build in a cut or a curve like that and you cut the curve, you can then steer that to the next target, but you have to get progressively deeper every time you do that, because you're cutting the pre-existing curve. When you wedge, you essentially get progressively shallower, because it's really tricky to put a wedge past a wedge. So put your first wedge down, do all the directional work you want to do. If you can't reach your targets from where those holes are, because as you get closer, the dogleg increases, and there is a point where you just can't do it, then you just move up in the hole, you set another wedge, and you do it all over again. So the higher you go, the more efficient the directional steer becomes, but then it's more meters that you're going to drill. So there's a little bit of a trade-off of evaluating each target and saying, what's the most effective way to do this? Is it a hole from surface? Which it might be if they're big step outs. And then you can use that as a platform. One of the awesome things that we have is we have a number of temporarily abandoned holes, like 250 was drilled in 2016. It is temporarily sealed, which is what you can do in Minnesota for 10 years. That's what allowed us to get down the hole, to unblock it and see what's down there. In doing that, we decided to extend it, and 50 meters later popped into the massive sulfides. So you can use them for making discoveries, but you can also just use them as a platform to do directional drilling with an existing parent hole.
Very cool. I just learned a bunch of new things there about the process of drilling wedge holes off the parent hole. Thank you, Brian. This was a very insightful conversation, and I look forward to having more in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Anytime.